girlfriend, Maggie Curtis, at that time, shortly after his wife, all appeared within 6 months.
Well, the reason I asked, Jerry Bales came up to my office, and I was talking to him, and I told him about science fiction conventions and science fiction fan magazines. He knew nothing about them. And he said, boy, that's a great idea. And my feeling is that I inspired him to put out the first fan magazine, or thereabouts, and possibly get involved in starting conventions, which would make me a double hero because I was instrumental in putting out the first science fiction convention, and I did put out the first fan magazine, science fiction fan magazine, with my lifelong friend, Ward Weisinger. So, but I must tell you,
what was that magazine?
The Time Traveler. It was put out in January 1932. It was the first fan magazine. It developed into Science Fiction Digest and then Fantasy Magazine, which an authority like Sam Moskowitz says, even though it came out between 1932 and 1936, was the best fan magazine ever put out. It was a printed magazine, ran as many as 80 pages. Well, I don't think I should talk about science fiction fan magazines, but that's another story. Maybe that's for the 1 o'clock thing, I don't know.
Yeah, we do have another panel we'll get into.
I'm not on it, but I may be drafted to it.
Okay.
But that's my recollection, that Jerry Bales was inspired by his visit up to my office.
What was your feelings about that? I mean, here for the longest time, comics had, you've been working in this medium, and it was pretty much ignored. What had happened in the past was forgotten, and perhaps there were a handful of kids who were interested in what was going on in the present.
We never thought of conventions. We never thought of the only fans we knew. Every Thursday we would have a tour of the DC Comics office.
This was what, in the 60s?
Oh, that must have been early. There was fellas like Len Wein came up, Marv Wolfman, a young kid named Paul Levitz, who is now the vice president of DC Comics.
Wolfman and Wein did not enter into this field until 46, 47, 48.
As fans, you thought?
Well, they were youngsters, came up to my shop.
Yeah, they came up to Jack Kirby, they went to all
looking, they were going to start a magazine, a school magazine. They were just out of school, came into my shop and asked me would I publish a high school magazine. That was the first time I saw them, and I think they hadn't entered the field until then. So I was just trying to get a fix on it.
Yeah, we have, at least I haven't thought much about it. I've got to do it because I've been urged to do my memoirs before my memory goes completely haywire.
Start now.
Who was this guy on my left?
I don't know. I remember somebody heckling him yesterday, so.
If you recall, right. That was another session, however. That's what gave Julie Schwartz a cold.
Yes.
Anyway, my recollection could only be from when I had started in the field, and that was just about 1939 up to 1950, totally. These fellas all were more involved as time went on. And by 1950, I was out of the field, so I can't say much about the 60s or 70s. But while I was there, working on it, it was just a matter of working on Green Lantern until about 47, and then getting out of the field for about a year, and then getting back into working with Stan Lee for a couple of years, and it was just a matter of the work I was doing.
How did you feel when you found out that people were, suddenly there was this interest in the comics that you had been doing? When did you find that out, or was there some kind of revelation that you know?
Well, roughly about 1978, we had been on a trip to Hawaii, and on the way back we stopped off at San Diego, and it's quite a big naval base there. My wife dragged me into a comic book shop and asked the shopkeeper there if he had any Green Lantern books. She seemed to know about the Golden Age and more than I did anything about that. And so he said, I have a Green Lantern book. She asked if he had an ancient one, that of the Golden Age. He said, wait. He went to the back of the shop, opened up a huge cupboard after he unlocked it, took out a large case, unlocked that, took out a little folio that had a case over it, opened up another thing. He must have been about 5 things that he opened up before he came to the Green Lantern, which was in a plastic sleeve. Opened it up, and he asked us to look at it. We looked at it. Carrie asked, "Do you want to meet the creator of this?" It was one of the very early ones, maybe second or third American, and had a Green Lantern cover on it. And he said, yes, fine. So she said, well, meet the creator right here. Well, he flipped, he had me sign it, and now he said it's worth a whole lot more, that sort of thing. But, but of course, actually, that's about where I began. And then he suggested that if when I go back home, which was at that time in Chicago, make up some drawings of Green Lantern. I didn't know what that really meant. Just sketches. He would be able to sell them in the naval base to all the Navy guys who would come into the store, pick up anything he had. His shelves would be bare by the time a ship would go out. Then he'd get new stock, and he said, if you had drawings that you could send me, I could sell them for, who knows, $10, $20. It seemed pretty good, but I never did get to that. I was still not concerned with that, but all I can do now really is echo what Will had said. And it was a matter of getting involved in the shows, and I'm still learning about how everything has become part of the present culture generally, and a new genre of things going on in comics generally. I knew very little about it, knew nothing about it actually, until, say, about '81, when, again, my wife had me interested in one chap in Chicago who had gotten the store. In short, he owns Moondogs, and that's Gary Colabuono, and he became a fast friend and guided me into comics and what I'm doing now and getting to shows. And of course, Will took me by the hand one time in one of my early shows in Orlando, and that's where we met, and that was a good long time ago. So it's my involvement.
Yeah. All right, let's try and work our way back now into the period of the Golden Age. I know you're making some notes. Did you have some
Always
questions?
make notes.
Oh, you always make notes. If you had some questions, you know,
Well, this goes back to the session yesterday with Mart Nodell, which we just barely touched on it, but I would like these guys to talk about the relationship between the publishers and the independent freelancers, but in between there were these studios. The most famous ones that I can recall are the Bender brothers, Otto and his brother Jack, and a fellow named Harry A. Chesler, who always put his middle initial A in quotation marks. I could never figure out why. And some guy named Harry Eiger, who had a partner.
who was
He had
that?
some partner.
Anybody remember who that was?
Always dropped out of sight.
Yeah.
What son is he? His son.
This is Will Eisner.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Seriously,
Nice fellow.
what these studios or job shops were really like and how they fit in. Because I don't think the industry would have been the same without them.
Well, as Jerry Iger's partner, I'll tell you, the comic book shops in those days, at least the one I started, and of course the Bender shop. Chesler was another ball of wax. Harry Chesler ran a quasi-publishing venture. My shop was run pretty much like almost a creative factory, I guess, almost like an animation studio. The function of those shops at the time was to package a comic book and provide it to the publishers. At that time, publishers were coming into the business from the pulps. In 1936, 37, the pulp industry, I don't know if you people know what pulps are. He would know because science fiction was...
I was involved in many posts besides science fiction. detective, mystery,
That's right.
westerns, and so on.
Popular
In fact,
publications.
excuse me, next week, there's a convention in New Jersey called PulpCon.
No kidding.
You know,
They
you never heard of
No,
PulpCon?
no.
Oh, yes, all
Incredible.
the fanatics come.
The pulps were a form of a pre-runner of the paperbacks we know today. And they were called pulps because the paper was newsprint, blown up, aerated, filled with air to such a degree that the paper had the consistency of paper towels that you have in the kitchen paper towels. And the artwork was specially done for those. Some great artists were working in those things. Guys like Matt Clark and later on became a comic book cover designer. Anyway, a number of them. I did some too, and there was a lot of dry brush art and so forth. Anyway, the pulp publishers were beginning to feel the fact that the industry was dying under them. Street and Smith and popular publications beginning to lose circulation. They were looking around for other things to publish, and that's where comics came in, because the first comic book, Famous Funnies, took off with such tremendous success almost immediately that they said, this is endemic to the publishing business anyway. Somebody does something, it makes a success, that within 2 weeks everybody else, the other publisher in the business is in there, because the publisher is in continuing search of the market. So in my particular case, I recognized, and it didn't, as I say, I always say it didn't take great genius to recognize that the availability of comic book material, which was being taken from the strips, the early comic books, the first comic books, Famous Funnies and More Fun and so forth, were a collection of daily strips pasted together to make what seemed to be a complete magazine. There were no complete story books. And so I proposed to Eisner, who had just, his magazine, Wow, just collapsed under him and me, because it was my second issue that I'd done some work, that we form a studio to produce packaged material that would go out for publishers. And Eisner was a good salesman, not a very good artist, but a very good salesman. And I was the artist, and I was producing the stuff. It was that kind of thing. The Bender brothers did essentially the same thing shortly thereafter. Harry Chesler would do the same thing. In those days, you could buy artwork fairly cheaply because there was no precedent for it. The only difference between my studio and their studios was that I hired the artists on a salary with the idea that I could control the quality of art. Being an artist myself, I was very concerned about art quality. Chesler was a businessman. The Bender brothers were artists, but they were businessmen, essentially. They were turning out yardage. And you had to in those days, because we were selling artwork at $5 a page. That included writing, drawing, and mental anguish. The function of the studio was to produce, in effect, a total package that the publisher would take and give to his printer. Most of the publishers knew nothing about comics. And in the case of the Eisner studio, we were predicated on the basis of the fact that there was no, up until the point the Eisner studio started, there was no really complete stories being offered. And it was necessary to do that because they were running out of daily strips. And that's where the $5 a page came from, by the way, because Iger came back to the shop one day and he said, well, all we can get is $5 a page. Why? Because the proofs that they were buying from the syndicates, they were buying at $5 a page, proofs. And that was all they were willing to pay. So that was a function of the commercial shops at those times. And out of that shop grew some very, very fine talent, because what we were doing, and I think Binder did the same thing, you were training artists at the same time. The artists that I was recruiting came from various fields. Okay, they were Bloom, Alex Bloom was a muralist. Lou Fine